So, hello everybody and welcome to episode 4 of our Table Talk Collective, a new initiative that tries to bring together activists, scholars, academics, and basically all people interested in animal studies in India and about India. And our speaker today, or our expert today with whom we'll be discussing his text is Suvadip Sinha from the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. Shubhadeep, would you prefer that I introduce you, or would you prefer to introduce yourself, or shall we just get to your article?
I don't think any introduction is needed. I teach here at University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, in the Department of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. That should be fine.
Yes, and for the rest of it, we'll get to know you in the course of this table talk, you and the work that you do, right?
Sure.
Through the prism of the one article, the chapter that we are going to be discussing today, which is Pariah Dogs, Precarious Cohabitation, from the volume also co-edited by Suvadip, which was titled Posthuman Animalities, right?
Postcolonial Animalities.
Postcolonial Animalities. So I'd like to start today, Shubhadeep, with the very first sentence, the question that you have in your chapter, namely, can the human and non-human animal be contemporaneously terrified and vulnerable? And this opening sentence that you've used, as well as the injunction that you've placed not too late after this opening sentence, to think of human and non-human animals on separate registers, as far as precarity is concerned, as far as vulnerability and violence are concerned, situate your text in obvious opposition to the long history of speciesist differentiation that has abounded in Western thought, or what we then also have been terming the anthropological difference, namely the idea that there is a fundamental difference between human animals and non-human animals. Whose writing or whose animal writing would you say has had the most profound influence on how you think of the shared vulnerability between human and non-human animals?
You started with a difficult question, I must say. Almost an unanswerable question.
There need not be one correct answer. You can also, tell us about a set of people, or whichever way you see this.
Yeah, my answer will be to this question is that perhaps in the long duration of literary history and literature, I'm using the term here very loosely, in a sense, in real life situation or literary cultural texts, this shared vulnerability between human and non-human animals, it is not actually it does not follow the such strict binary, speciesist binary. And of course, and if there is, or at least a construction of this binary becomes fairly dominant in modern literature. And that too, modern literature from specific regions of the world, mostly regions that are dominated by the post-enlightenment modernity, post-enlightenment rationality. But there are authors, I can name the two texts that I talk about here, but lot of other in African literature, in South Asian literature, or literature from other non-Western parts of the world, and I must say even some Western parts of the world, this binary is constantly challenged. And we see a different, I hate the word different. We see a constant representation of and belief in this trans-species or multi-species being together or coming together through vulnerability. And here I must say, Anu, that although the chapter that I shared is around the concept of vulnerability, but it's been a couple of years since I wrote this, and I started questioning myself. I have been questioning myself because that is needed, perhaps, not perhaps. And I started to think that why do we need to think of human non-human relationship through vulnerability alone? And I start seeing my position in this paper, start seeing some problematics within my position.
Well, you preempted one of my later questions already, but yeah, let's go on.
But you see that think of Mahabharata, that episode, when the last episode of Mahabharata, the Pandavas are going to whatever, Indrapuri or heaven, whatever. It might be a metaphorical space, but they are going, and there's this stray dog who follows them, right? If you remember. And then all the other four brothers, they kind of die, or for their sins. Draupadi also dies, and this stray dog that comes with Yudhishthir keeps going with Yudhishthir till the gate of the heaven. And again, what a fantastic example. Like, that's why I'm saying that this, if you take this long durée view of this relationship, that they are vulnerable, they are going through an arduous journey. It's a difficult, maybe they were walking through Himalayas or something. If there is any heaven, I think it is there in the Himalayas. There is no heaven there, up there. But they were walking through this difficult path, and the dog keeps following, and at the gate of the heaven, Yudhishthir says that I won't enter the heaven if you don't let my dog come in with me. And the dog changes its form and shows itself to be, I think, dharma.
Yes.
And this is what a fantastic ethical moment about human and non-human companionship. They are being together, becoming together, and traveling together through a phase of vulnerability. So I gave a very kind of long, convoluted answer to your question. So in short, I will find it difficult to say that, okay, this is the author, or these are the authors. Rather, I'd say that people who are interested in this question, they should look for even some inane, banal examples where we see this relationship coming into being.
Right. My second question then, Suvadip, to you, it's more also it's not exactly a question, it's more to get clarity on a point, because I see or I read your process of listening that you've mentioned in your chapter, active and ethical act of listening, as something which one also finds in the writings of other people writing about human and non-human animals coexisting, being companions, so to speak, beyond the idea of companion animals per se. One of them would be, for example, Julieta Singh's idea of vulnerable listening, which I think is also quite close to what you were talking about, or Kari Driscoll and Eva Hoffman's attentive listening. And I find it intriguing that there is this idea that this method or this approach of listening is being suggested more and more in approaching the animal, in literature, in thought. Is this also a sort of rejection of the older approach, where it was really like, you have to know things, you have to have empirical data, you observe and then you draw conclusions, and you have your body of knowledge that you produce, which you say is sort of supported by facts. And if you don't have facts, if you're talking to an animal and the animal can't answer you in human language, then you say that the animal is stupid or is dumb or is inferior. And the listening, of course, enables a different approach, which is the empathy-based approach, meaning you might not understand, but that's not the aim. The aim is perhaps to feel along with the other, and this other could be a human other, it could be a non-human other. No? In your case, I think also it is literally listening, because you've got the dogs barking.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how you also mean the act of listening being intrinsic, being central to?
Yeah, I'm happy that you brought up this question. Um, it's kind of anecdotal. Just if I can share an anecdote, when
Absolutely.
I sent out this paper for review, and the review, I don't know who the reviewer was. One of the reviewers says that, oh, this is like this idea of sound or sonic register hasn't been explored much in animal studies, because always language and its other, and but there are, as you mentioned, Julieta Singh, but there is another book called Sonic Intimacy. In one of the chapters in Sonic Intimacy, it talks about sound. And yes, and I think, if not in literary studies, but in sound studies, like in decolonial sound studies, some scholars have started working. I think one or two books are there on these lines about where do you draw the line between language and sound, and being alert to sound, or even questioning the boundary between language and sound, can be a very potent starting point of questioning anthropocentrism.
Mhm.
And this is where I think the act of ethical listening, or maybe ethical hearing, I want to make a distinction between listening and hearing. We listen with some agency, but we hear without that agency. Perhaps we shouldn't make even that distinction between listening and hearing. Our subjectivity comes in when we listen, or want to listen, try to listen, but here it's a presubjective act, to my mind. So yes, uh, and again, to give an anecdote, being here in North America, one of the things that I miss is hearing non-human sound sometimes, or hearing sound. Everything is very quiet here. And when I go to India, everything is, that is the register, that is the uh, I start hearing from 5 a.m. in the morning. Here, I don't hear. And dogs
Yeah.
barking, cats meowing, and birds chirping, everything. And here, that brought me, and I think in both these stories, the act of hearing non-human sound plays a very significant role. And I think that line of inquiry, that line of and should be pursued, should be followed even more diligently. But it also brings up a very difficult question of representation, right? Like when you are writing a literary text, or even making a film, and the moment you represent that hearing, that sound, one might say that, okay, here your human agency is coming in. When you are
Mm.
making a dog bark in a film, or you are writing in English, Bangla, or Hindi, or whatever language, then that moment, that non-human characteristic of sound perhaps gets lost. But as readers and as mm, interpreters of text, we need to be cautious, need to be alert about that difficult terrain. That, okay, I'm reading a dog saying hoof hoof, or bark bark, or whatever in Bangla, gheu gheu, in English, in language. But the moment I'm reading that, I'm actually not, this is not the actual sound the dog produces.
Yes. Mm.
So here I think as interpreters of literary texts, we need to belong to two domains when we write, when we think about this in our that is a domain of real life existence, and of course the sonic universe of real world, and of course the written world of literary text. But I do think that hearing and ethical hearing of sound can actually take us out of this long drawn discussion between language and its other language, human, non-language, non-human, that has been there, as you most of you know, that is there in so much of Euro-American theories, philosophies of uh, non-human being.
How difficult was it for you to listen in the text, let's say, vis-a-vis the movie? Because you mentioned this in your chapter, and it obviously makes sense. It's exactly what you said. It's an issue of representation also. Saying in any language the dog barked or the bird chirped or something. It's the sound made by the animal being represented in human language, and of course the medium of cinema allows us to sort of get over this hurdle. How sharply did you feel this, having read the text? And
yes, yeah. It's, as I said, that it is a dilemma, difficulty that we can only be concerned about, we can only be alert to, but I don't, at least for me, I don't think we can get out of it. I remember I was teaching a class here, a graduate class, and this is also we do. I know you have like 4 dogs. We also do a kind of humanist projection, right? Oh, my dog is barking this way, the dog must be sad, or the dog must be hungry, or the cat must be this. I'm not saying that it is always impossible to predict this, that after being with these animals we start making sense, we can start making sense. The dog is perhaps, if the dog is barking this way, that means it needs to get out, or it needs to uh, uh, it is hungry or something. But I was that in that class I had a student who had cats, and I was like, the cat is meowing, that doesn't mean that the cat is actually saying I love you. We do that, this humanist projection, right? The cat is meowing means, oh, the cat is so, it's cozy, it wants to cozy up, it wants to be in my lap. But perhaps the cat is saying, screw you, go back, like stay away. So this is that there is it is this impossibility. We have to recognize that impossibility of translation of sound into language, translation of sound into something that we are familiar within our cognitive world. I don't think, to answer again to answer your question, I don't think I managed to get out of this conundrum, but my word is live with the conundrum, at least recognize it. That there is a sonic world, there is a sonic universe that we are supposed to have, we are not supposed to have mastery over. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and it connects very nicely and neatly also to the next thing that I was thinking of while you were talking about this, which was the use of this as if phrase in the story. I'm feeling fine now, whereby it's there's a certain kind of human way of expressing something that is being ascribed to a dog. The dog was barking as if, the dog was panting as if. I mean, I think it's usually used in connection with was barking as if. And you've raised the question there also of anthropomorphizing. And you say that you prefer to listen to Tommy's barking as just barking. And that's actually the point that you made right now. And that kind of made me think of the same thing. Do you think that in that sense, I mean, anthropomorphizing can solve or serve any purpose at all in literature, or is it just silly sentimentality?
No, I don't think it is silly sentimentality. I know there are some people who are radically against anthropomorphism. But the moment we think in ourselves that, okay, we are anthropomorphizing, we are already kind of moving ourselves into a desubjective position. If you think of the word anthropomorphism, that means the word itself, before coming to the word, you need to, there is a recognition that there is something non-anthropic, non-anthropocentric, or non-human. We are, it's almost a ventriloquism, right? That there is somebody, we are just mimicking their voice. So I'm not as radically against anthropomorphism as some scholars are, some people are. It is, yes, at some points, as I said, that it can be silly sentimentality. It can be pragmatic too. Your cat can be actually hungry and asking for food when it is meowing. So go give them the food that they want. Or your dog wants to go out. So take the dog out before it starts doing nasty things inside your household. So yes, I'm not, but that point that, okay, we are anthropomorphizing. And this is where I think a very ethical moment is there, that we are bringing something, anthropomorphism is an act through which we are attempting to bring beings, ontological beings, actual beings within the universe, all of course insufficiently within the universe that we are familiar with, we think of our own. It has its pragmatic value, perhaps in some cases that is in some cases that is the only way we can represent, but there should be a kind of ethical moment before we anthropomorphize.
Before I go on to the next one, Susan, you have a question. And the others also, anytime that you have a question or a comment or a remark, feedback, anything of the sort, please raise your hands and we'll be happy to take your questions. Go on, Susan.
Yes. Really nice to meet you after hearing about you for all these months. I was just thinking about what you said about anthropomorphism, and recently I've been wondering if anthropomorphism gets a bad rep, because in from ancient literature onwards, anthropomorphism has been such an important, significant way of connecting with animals and thinking about animals. And would it be possible to think about anthropomorphism as a concept that allows us to create a world of shared meanings or shared concepts with animals, rather than thinking about anthropomorphism simply as a vehicle for humanism of some kind? Because even when we are thinking about ethical entry points into human-animal relationships, such as kinship, anthropomorphism does provide, I wouldn't say use value, because again, that would be problematic, but simply an ethical moment to inaugurate the relationship, so to speak.
No, of course, as I was saying to Anu's last question, that yes, it is, the thing is, there is an element of speculation, which of course, when we anthropomorphize, we don't always remember, because we don't always think about. There is an element of speculation in anthropomorphism. So and speculation means uncertainty. Speculation means there is something out there that we can only speculate about, which is coming from the future, which we are not completely about whose presence we are not fully aware of. So yes, one person I have been reading for last few months, particularly since his death a couple of months ago. Of course, he hasn't. J. Hillis Miller, and I know Hillis Miller, or they have been kind of passé now. They were big names when I was a graduate student in JNU, the whole Derridian deconstruction school and Hillis Miller. And he's of course not using the idea of concept of anthropomorphism in his writings. But one of the things that he talks about is this pathetic fallacy about giving kind of sensate identity to inert beings in lot of his writings on literary analysis. And I am kind of trying to extrapolate from Hillis Miller to human animal studies or animal literary studies. And he talks about this idea, what you are saying, that from ancient literature, it has been not only non-human animals, like even other non-human beings, or like even inert beings, they have frequently been given kind of living identity, right? And Hillis Miller says that as long as we are not doing with some kind of certitude, epistemological certitude, that this is it, this is how a chair speaks. I'm talking about a chair. This is how a car speaks, or this is how a tree behaves. No, what Hillis Miller is saying, that be aware of that speculative act within this pathetic fallacy, because it is a fallacy after all. It is a faulty fallacy, and this is where I think, to answer your question, that's why I'm not as radically opposed to anthropomorphism as some people are. As long as we are aware of that we don't have control over their universe, we are only doing it for some temporary convenience, and also on our terms. So our terminologies, our as ifs, are always with as ifs. There is no certitude. Just to go a bit off topic, sorry, I forgot the name. I was reading a book and the book was actually arguing, saying that since enlightenment, the entire our quest of knowledge, like the whole epistemological universe, has been overdetermined by certainty. Oh, I know this. I am the master. I am the expert. That's why, Anu, I wanted to say, don't call me expert. So, and the book was arguing against that, arguing, saying that we need to renounce this idea of expertise or this kind of mastery over the universe. As long as we do that, anthropomorphism can be a productive way of connecting, at least in the universe of language, human language, connecting with the non-human world.
Just to follow up on that, it's really fascinating that you use the words certitude and speculative. One of my research interests, it's in skepticism, and the whole project of skepticism is how do you respond to the skeptic when he asks if you can know anything with certainty about the world at all. And this is a question that can be extended to other humans, but also to other beings. And I'm just trying to think it through. And if the skeptic is right, and if we cannot know any other being with any certainty at all, and if we stay consistent with what you're trying to say about the role of language as well, that the human animal relation need not be defined in terms of language alone, then what is the nature of uncertainty that we face with regard to the animal, as opposed to the uncertainty of speaking or communicating or knowing the human?
Yeah, this actually brings me, like, takes me back to the first question that Anu asked, that the idea of vulnerability. As much as, like, as I saying that we need to be uncertain, or in your terms, we need to acknowledge the skepticism. I'm a big skeptic about everything. Uh, but at the same time, there can be uh, overlaps, there can be co-belonging there, and there can be phenomenological uh, friendships, companionship. And this is, at least in this chapter, I was thinking, okay, vulnerability or idea of precarity can bring that sense of being together, that we might not understand each other, we might not and this is, of course, I can say that uh, this has been there in kind of post-structural philosophy. In other terms, like, of course, I'm very much influenced by Derrida, although I have started to disagree with some part of his ideas about animals. But uh, but this whole, that this stranger, there can be an absolute stranger, there can be an unknown guest, and we might not understand their language at all. It's But at the same time, that doesn't foreclose upon the possibility of belonging somewhere together. So skepticism is not cynicism, right? Uncertainty is not always an absolute other of certainty, although language, whatever conventional understanding of language asks us to make this okay, certainty, antonym is uncertainty. Uncertainty is not at least in my understanding, is not an absolute other of certainty. Uncertainty is somewhere in the gray zone. It is okay, it is not certainty, but not the absolute opposite. So a dog, even if I don't understand the dog's bark, they can be my friend. This is where, like, I think skepticism is perhaps more close to the idea of uncertainty here, the way I am thinking of uncertainty. That skepticism is not denial, right? Skepticism is that phase of, okay, I don't know, I'm unsure. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, it does. It's very interesting what you said about uncertainty not being the total antonym.
At least I don't think so. In fact, I don't know. Again, I see one of my student is here on this session. Like, there is a, like, when I was thinking of this, uh, like, absolute stranger, I like guessed, of course, those of you who are aware of Derrida's hospitality essay book, and he has talked about this guest and host and ghost. But I sometimes I think and I write on South Asian texts. I don't write on Anglophone texts. I don't, but I do, but I try not to. I prefer to write on non-Anglophone South Asian texts. And that's why the word, I don't know in other languages, but at least in Hindi and Bangla, the word for guest is atithi. And that word is, so if you are thinking about Indian, that we need to think about this word, the animal, as the atithi. The atithi means, that means who comes without tithi, without time. Tithi means there is a time point, right? Okay, this is the time of my arrival, but atithi has no time of arrival. So if you want to be the ideal host, or whatever, an ethical host, we need to be ready for atithi whose time of arrival we are not aware of. uh, and perhaps the non-human animal is the atithi. We are I don't want to be nativist, I hate nativist positions, but at the same time, it is interesting to think in vernacular terminologies. or non-English terminology.
Thank you. We had one more question. Somebody had raised a hand. I think it was Swati Lekha. Did you have a question?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Hi, I was just going through your text. It was really interesting, and coincidentally, my research area also converges to a great extent with the topic of today's speech. Incidentally, I presented a paper on this dogs barking and how it is being interpreted or influenced by media or in our cultural studies in 2019. So my question to Dr. Sinha would be, like, when I'm looking at the literature which deals with the canine presence, specifically in the South Asian context, I'm always coming across, these references to the Western philosophers, namely Derrida, then there is Agamben, and, that cloud of like theories and philosophies. But what I really find interesting is that how do you like, as a theorist, or as someone who is writing or who is working on the works on the animals, how do you explain the position of the people who coexist, who cohabit, and like, who actually, how can I put it, fight for these animals? Like, what is the position of the animal activists? Not specifically, I'm talking about theorists here, because uh, I mean, in my practical experience as well as in the academic works that I'm coming across, there is a considerable gap between the works we write about and the things are there in the real life, like the gap between the theory and praxis. So from a philosophical or ethical point of view, how do you like aim to bridge this kind of, how can I put it, gap?
Sure. As I said that, Anu, that this chapter was written a couple of years ago, and I have just a month or so ago I finished writing the entire a whole book, which will be out soon, sometime. And kind of in that book, I have kind of expanded on some of the concepts that are there in this essay. One of the things, of course, I must agree, and it's not everybody knows that as long as the dominant theoretical philosophical framework through which non-human studies or animal literary studies or cultural studies are they are predominantly the names, the usual suspects that you mentioned, Derrida, Agamben, and then of course a whole lot of secondary scholars who go to these holy texts and use them, and which I must admit that I also do that. I cannot say that I have managed to free myself from that kind of canonical universe. But at the same time, I do think that, and as I kept thinking about some of these things, that there is a kind of both ontological and epistemological limitation within this universe. And I'll tell you what like your question makes me, or I can say that one is either most of them are thinking or writing about animals in very abstract metaphysical terms, uh, including Derrida's cat. Although there is an actual cat, but there is just one cat, and Derrida is making a whole range of universal assumptions about depending on that cat or who sees him naked. So it's the naked cat and Derrida, naked Derrida, and you have a whole theory. So either, so there is this abstract metaphysical way, or the other thing is, and the other limitation that I see, and as I said, that this will remind you of some of the things that I was talking about, the sonic universe I miss here, is that it is heavily premised upon a domestic speciality. Domestic speciality in the sense, and you can read Donna Haraway, even Derrida, like even if they are talking about this living beings, living non-humans, there is this home becomes the space where this companionship comes into being. So one of the things that I tried to do in the book, one of the chapters in the book, that I wanted to push, I tried to push the question of stray and the idea of stray. Like why do the dog doesn't want to be, a stray dog doesn't want to be a friend, perhaps. You know, okay, the thing is that the whole thing is, even Haraway, that whose companion are we talking about? What if the dog doesn't want to be a companion? When you are saying companion manifesto, who is thinking of companion? The cat hates me. The stray cat hates me. It doesn't want to be my companion. Do we go and kill them then? So I think that this is one question, and I think this is something how the modern Western world exists here, because the concept of strays on an everyday level is very alien to, has become very alien to people here, and that is one. And I totally agree with you that there is, we need to think, in order to decolonize animal studies, in order to free the field from this Euro-American hold, one of the ideas we need to think, that's the concept of stray, because but animal activism, I must say, don't hate me for that, I am divided how that activism works out. Activism sometimes kind of takes a circular route and gives us a pat on our back. And I see a lot of in activist vocabulary, animal activist vocabulary, that the vocabulary they use is directly borrowed from the Enlightenment human rights vocabulary. So if we want to talk about animal rights, if we want to talk about, as I said, that like if you think that some of this human rights vocabulary, and which is a very post-Enlightenment legacy, that we think that, oh, you know, they are like us. A refugee is as human as I am. An asylum seeker is as moral as we are. Right? An Afghan person is as human as we are. So there is this as human, as moral, or as good as we are. And some of them, then this is where, like, when it comes to animal activism, we are, oh, they are as sensible, animals are as sensible as we are. Yes, perhaps they are, but I think the vocabulary that we use in the field of activism can be like disentangled from this whole burden and weight of humanism.
It was really nicely explained, and there is this vocabulary. I just want to mention it here. I mean, just to give you one example, like how can we explain a dog's death? Like a dog's death. There is this phrase now. Yeah, so I was talking to one of my fellow researchers, and he was giving me examples from Heideggerian perspective, like a dog cannot die, right? But as anyone can know, I mean, this is philosophically all right, but it is also very absurd.
It
So
is
I
not
think
even
it is
philosophically all right, I must say. It is philosophically very problematic. Derrida has
very
questioned it.
problematic, but still people consider this kind of, how can I put it, POV. So I think, this gap between theory or praxis, that is very complicated. And I agree to you. I mean,
Yeah,
that is,
when
that
Derrida
is,
says a dog or whatever, an animal cannot die, he is not talking about the embodied act of death.
I
He
know.
is in talking about
Yeah.
abstract idea that because the animal doesn't have a world, it stops living, but it cannot die, right? It
So we
roams.
are always looking at these animals from an essentially anthropocentric perspective. A dog or a cat cannot have word in our dictionary. I mean, according to
Of
our
course.
language, because we do not know their language. That's all. Okay,
Yeah.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah, Shivadeep, you've also, because we've been talking about this, what you call also the blindness towards public animals. The question that we just had about, this sort of a lacuna in Western thought, looking at the animal or considering the animal only as an abstract animal and not as a real animal in that sense, as an actual animal, I think is also predicated upon the fact that Western societies, at least the European ones from which writing stems, as well as the North American ones from which this writing stems, do not have animals necessarily in close proximity to people. They are not really a part of your world, of your day-to-day lived experience, unless you have a pet, a companion animal at home. Um, that brings me then to the next thing that I've had on my mind, and we've been talking about with other people. The fact that these animals in public spaces, which is a phenomenon that makes perfect sense here in India or in other South Asian contexts, and which does not make sense in large parts of the globe. If one thinks of the northern half, for example, but not only. And how does one reconcile then the fact that when we read Heidegger, I mean, we don't read Heidegger anymore. Let's agree on that. Everybody's decided that we don't need to Heidegger to read him
No,
anymore.
I must say there are
We
some
don't read him.
there are some good things in Heidegger, but perhaps not in his idea of animals. But let's have that.
Not enough to pardon the guy. Okay, so we have
Let's
in the
have that
German
debate
department
separately.
also. Yes, but I shall still note that we don't read Heidegger anymore. But putting that aside too, even when we read the rest of the scholars that we have, especially, I mean, yeah, of course, the Western canonical writing on the animal, the abstract animal is very far removed from the actual animal, or even the idea of, let's say, the pariah dog, the street dog, the stray dog, the free ranging dog, whatever one may call it, that lives next to us, barks on our streets at night and keeps us awake, or chases us when we go out on our bikes. And that is a lived reality, which we also find not reflected really in literature. There's hardly anything in which street dogs, for example, occur. There might be a slight mention. In contrast, I find that there is writing in India in which companions animals, the pet cat or the pet dog or whatever, are mentioned in writing in English, for example. There are very few texts in which street dogs occur. And I find this gap very hard to explain. Why are Indian writers not writing about animals the way they experience animals? Why are they writing about animals in a way that is actually fairly artificial, alien to us? I found a text by Anita Desai, for example. It's a short story in one of her older connections. It's I think a compilation called Diamond Dust or something. And there is a short story about a retired civil servant who gets this puppy or dog home from the street, and he wants this dog to be his pet dog. Only the dog doesn't want to be at home. He's constantly trying to get out of the house and go because there are female dogs in heat, or just because he likes being outside. That's been his universe. He's free. He has agency outside. But in the house, Mr. Das keeps him restrained. At the end of the story, I mean, the man goes berserk because he, in his own eyes, loves this dog and thinks of it as his son, wants him to be safe. The neighbors think he's crazy. They hate him. At the end of it, the dog is captured by the municipal authorities and he's taken away in a truck. And that's the last thing that Mr. Das sees. He's running after the truck. I don't remember clearly. I think he falls down in exhaustion because the dog's gone. And there you've got this really, this picture of the dog, which for me is symptomatic, of this dog that one wants to control, bring into the domestic domain, turn into a piece of property, let's face it. No? But it doesn't want to be there. And it keeps trying to escape. And if the price that is to be paid is death, then so be it. And but I don't find many texts in which this happens.
No, actually, you're absolutely like this. I'll tell you that a colleague's parents were visiting from India, like they live in Lucknow. So and they invited us when his parents were visiting. He invited us for dinner, and so we went. And as we were leaving, his parents came out to see us off. And one thing his father said, who were by the way were profoundly bored with being here for a month. We want to go back. We want to go we want to go back to India. So anyways, when they came out to see us off, the father, and it stayed with me, his father said, and I'll repeat this in Hindi, कि यहाँ पे सबके पास कुत्ते होते हैं, कुत्ते नहीं होते हैं. And that he's not an academic or anything, if I remember correctly, he's a retired railway Indian Railways employee. And he said that यहाँ पे सबके पास कुत्ते होते हैं, कुत्ते नहीं होते. And this is what a fantastic statement, I must say. And by the way, that in lot of Indian, and this is where, like, I don't want to essentialize even South Asia as the other of West. In lot of South Asian spaces, the same thing happens. Look at all these gated communities, and so, like, there won't be strays, but lot of the residents in these communities, they have fancy purebred pet dogs or something like that.
And the same people who have these fancy dogs and care for them and love them to distraction, also are very intolerant of there being dogs on the street.
Yes, of course. That is what I'm saying. That so Partho Chatterjee, not in context of animal studies, he once wrote an essay, and there's are the Indian cities becoming bourgeois finally? And this is where, like, we are this kind of there is this drive to cleanse off, to purify, get rid of all the quote unquote impurities. And you mentioned this story where this municipality comes and takes away the dogs, which is a regular phenomena in lot of Indian cities. There are these things now in the same book. Actually, someone has an essay on the Turkish thing, that before in Turkey, before this massacre of Kurds, one thing works as a preamble. They, before getting rid of the Kurds, they got rid of the street dogs. So they moved all the street dogs to a remote island where they were left without any food, and essentially tried to eat each other, kill each other for food. So it's not that the Indian cities, there have been serious instances, and sometimes of this, sometimes there are these made up narratives which get highlighted in media about the meanness of street dogs. which I am not saying, this is where again, I hate to say that I love street dogs. One of the scariest memories of my childhood, I was scared shit of a stray dog who used to live next to our home. Like, I was so scared, I had to take a longer, like 10-minute extra walk to reach home just to avoid the dog. So this is where I think, why not? I can be scared. I can think of, okay, this is a disturbance for my neighborhood. That doesn't mean that I go and kill them. Or that doesn't mean that I have any right or I have any authority uh, to obliterate the universe that scary street dog inhabits. And to go back to your question, why not? Stray dogs do not feature more prominently in South Asian literature. Perhaps that is something to do with the limitation of literature itself. When we write literature, we fall into this whole, what, the prison of humanism. So we try to create narrative, we try to create a narrative universe or a narratological strategy, we try to build characters, and we cannot build characters out of strays, because that is why they stray. The moment we build characters out of strays, they are no longer strays. The moment we can predict that this is what they will do, they have become part of my universe. They are no longer strays. They are not atithi anymore, because I can predict the arrival of their temporality, or I can predict about their temporality. That if I dangle a piece of bread, the stray dog will come and eat it, which is good, fine. But there is strayness in its purest form, in its radical form, is erased at that moment. And that is where Swati Lekha, if I answer, that animal activism often depends, of course, for its good reasons, on that predictability. Right. During this pandemic, I saw so many news articles and videos, which is good. All these animal activists, they, at least in Kolkata, they were going places to places, giving food to street dogs. Absolutely, I'm not going to take, I don't want to take any credit away or from that. But that's the moment we are in that predictable zone, then I'm that the strayness is
That
taken
is
away.
true. Because empathy always gives emergence to some kind of expectedness or predictability. This empathy, whenever that notion of empathy is coming into the contact, it gives rise to a certain, like a certain portion of predictability or expectations from both angles. I mean, in the interspecies connections. And I should say, like, animal activism, even when we look at the history of animal laws or, the animal activism in India, it it certainly comes from, no, I mean, more, the conflicting zones of human animal, rather than on that predictability on the animal side itself. But of course, there are other, like, it is a very nuanced process itself.
Okay.
I think Susan has another question or something to say, and then we have a question in the chat from Keshav.
Yeah, I was attending this workshop that IIT Gandhinagar organized on caste and animals as these figures at the margins. And a lot of the papers focused on animality as something that is present in caste, that is used to represent people from the lower caste and so on. And I noticed that throughout your chapter, you make this fine distinction that it's not just that, especially in the text by Nabarun Bhattacharya, when he's talking about the animals, he's not making a particular point about the animals to talk about humans or about their suffering, but that just to quote you, but to draw attention to a state of zoopolitical exception that makes certain human and non-human lives unwanted and dispensable. And I think at another point you say that it's not there is a lot of commonality between the real and the analogous dog worlds, and that they share this kind of, they share and live in this zone of terror. So I was thinking maybe you could talk a bit about how you would define animality, in the sense, is it important to define animality as something unique to animal, to define it in the body of the animal, so that it is not simply used to describe oppression faced by the humans?
Yes, this is actually um, a question that cannot be answered in 2 minutes, but we can challenge humanism. We can, of course, we can question, we can try to dismantle humanism, but we also need to think that the long history of resistance politics, be it caste-based anti-colonial resistance, or other forms of resistance politics that are even active now in other parts of the world, different parts of the world, they actually have to follow, or they have to borrow or adapt certain ideas of humanism. Uh, right. That is why I think a term like post-humanism, which has become a kind of like universal academic term, I don't like that term, post-humanism, because it assumes that everybody are on the level, like same horizontal level of humanism, planetary level of humanism already, everybody. Not that. The humanism, the question is, the discourse of humanism is, of course, all of you know this, that it is an uneven plane, it is an uneven level. While it is easier for them, and I think easier for some of them to start questioning humanism and go into the zone of post-humanism, we need to remember that there are communities, there are groups, there are different forms of populations who are actually still striving to that level of human, and have been struggling to reach that level of humanism. So the enterprise of reaching post-humanist universe is a pointless enterprise for them anyway. So the caste question you were saying, that, and this is where, like, some say, I have friends who work on Palestinian literature, and they're like, what, Palestinians are trying to be humans first, they are killing us like dogs, street dogs. I was like, yes, I get, and they see, even if there was, and I think it is opening up gradually, a strong resistance against, say, the black population, black scholars here, African American scholars here, against animal studies, that uh, we are animals. They think we are treated like animals. So first take care of us. First, pay attention to our problem before you start. So this is where I think the question, to my answer to your question, will be divided. That one is that the problem, the analogy drawn between abject human population and an animal, like particularly dog and pig, is basically animals that we in culturally we are supposed to be disgusted with. These analogies, they have this root of this long problematic history of humanism. We don't need to talk about serious literary. Think of the most classic dialogue of Dharmendra in Bollywood, countless Bollywood films. "Kutto ke tarah maar dalunga." And so, and this is a kind of I think product or byproduct of this problematic and very um, uneven and kind of the power structure of the history of humanism, and we need to fight. We need to be aware of that. But at the same time, if we start questioning this so they're questioning this uneven power structure of humanism, then we can, the analogous use of animal that I talk about, we can use them even in a politically productive way. But I try to remain sensitive about people from these population groups who are even in term like in through tokenism, who get hurt, uh, who see a problem in this kind of analogous representation. I think very recently there is this film, right? I don't know if you have, like, Navaras. There is a recent anthology film on Netflix, Navaras, which is 9 films on 9 rasas, a Tamil anthology film. And there has been some kind of like, again, discussion, because I saw the film recently, and in one of them, like, there is this analogous relationship between a Dalit person and a dog, and some Dalit scholars found it very problematic. I saw the film. Again, it is also seeing the problem, or seeing it all sometimes depends upon someone's positionality, which is not perhaps problematic to me, might seem problematic to some other person. And who am I to say that your problem is stupid and my problem is not? Some problems that I am seeing, perhaps others are not seeing. The whole gamut of Euro-American scholars that we tried to criticize here, they saw everything was right in their animal philosophy. I see hundreds of, or we see hundreds of problems in there. So if that answers your question. Yes, there is one hand, I think.
There's one hand, and before that, we have a question from Keshav in the chat. Do you see that, Shubhadeep, or shall I read that out?
I can see the question. The problem
Keshav, if you'd like to come on screen or something and talk, then that's also an option.
The problem, if I can just read out the question, the problem of language and comprehension vis-a-vis interspecies communication and solidarity. I look at instincts as a way of engaging with this. Instincts and raw emotions in a state of precarity and vulnerability, as the stories illustrate, could elicit similar actions and reactions among humans and non-humans. So would you agree that one can communicate by way of some? Yes. I would say instinct and emotion, they are different, at least in English language. What will be the Hindi word for emotion? Or I don't want to I don't want to use Hindi as the go-to. Anyways, but instinct is instinct. I think instinctive reaction. Okay, so to answer your question, it can be a pre-subjective response, right? Instinct comes before the arrival of subjectivity. A lot of people say instinctive or affective instead of emotive. Affect theory scholars have also, some animal studies people have also used affect theory, that affect is before thinking. Affect is something that is before thinking, before cognition, before rationality. So you are absolutely, I'd agree that instinctive or affective response or reaction, which are not always within our control, they can be useful, or not useful, but they can be a way or productive way of communicate with the non-human animals.
Thank you. And Renu, you've raised your hand.
Yes,
please go ahead.
I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you, Professor. So my actually my research is on social media animal narratives, and your chapter, I know in your chapter you analyze this two literary texts and the filmic representation of those texts. So I'm curious to know your answer. So uh, in such social media animal narratives where the actual animal movement, animal sounds, what you call voice, and the body language are conveyed or are mediated through uh, such medias. Uh, what do you think? Are such animal narratives creating what you call, I'm quoting you here, a non-binaristic fluidity between animal shriek and animal and human speech? What do you think?
Uh, Very interesting question, and by the way, very interesting research topic, I must say. But I'm afraid I have to disappoint you with my answer. I'm actually, as a person, I'm stuck in my JNU days. Like I'm still in early 2000s. My question is, my answer is, I cannot even make sense of literature and cinema fully. How can I start making sense of social media? Yeah, I have, like, as an amateur, I have thought about social media, but as I said, that I have to be very honest and uh, uh, acknowledge my limitation as a person. I haven't actually thought, like, I haven't been able to make sense of social media. I have read some books, of course. I'm sure some of them are, you are aware of, that communicative capitalism and all this neoliberal fantasies about social media. So I've read my share of books. Of course, I read articles and stuff, but as a person, I haven't had the opportunity to think about the medium itself. Like, you ask me a question between difference between cinema and literary text, I can go on for half an hour right now. But social media, and as again, I have to say, I'm somebody, I have quit Facebook couple of months ago. I'm not on Twitter. I have an Instagram account, but I don't use it anymore. Don't even remember my password. So I'm a pariah, so, like, social, when it comes to social media. I rarely use my WhatsApp, uh, just to keep in touch with some friends and couple of friends and family, some parents and sisters. So I'm not that part of that. I'm trying to get out of that universe, because anyways, I will start sounding like an old man now. But but yes, it is a question that we need to think, and yes, I haven't had that opportunity. Perhaps in, like, what happens in, again, I say, it's a very interesting research topic, something very topical for our times, I think. um, but I'm sorry, I cannot answer that question.
That's okay, sir.
I, I I can only
I
speculate. It will be an ignorant speculation on my part.
Yeah, I completely understand. Even I am struggling to understand the chaos. So
Yes,
thank you, sir.
but you should like, you should work, like, this is a very interesting research topic, I must say, that if I can,
Uh,
because as I said, that I'm trying to avoid, but in our times we should not avoid, we cannot afford to avoid social media.
Thank you, thank you. So I'm actually trying to figure out how the COVID-19 lockdown has actually brought out so many social media pages for animals in the Indian context. So many celebrate animal pages, Instagram, Facebook pages for companion animals in India have been created and have begun to become popular, like in the West. So I'm really curious what is leading to that. So thank you.
No, thanks for asking the question. Perhaps this will force me to, at least in my ignorant amateurish way, to think about social media and animality. I'll try to do that.
All right. But then we have another question for you, Shubhadeep, and this I think will be our concluding question for the day. What do you think of an Indian animal studies?
Maybe we can have a WhatsApp call after this meeting, and I can give you my answer in pure Dilli wala Hindi, not not in some academic lingo. It's difficult. It's difficult and perhaps impossible, and not. I don't want to make any statement about Indian animal studies. No, no. When other
No.
people are around. No.
Okay, we'll leave it at that then.
Like I will have perhaps the same kind of response about American animal studies or European animal studies, but that's not like I don't want to essentialize that. Okay, this is what I think of Indian animal studies. One thing that I review journal articles. Of course, these are blind reviews mostly. Like I don't get to know the names of the authors or their institutional affiliation, but I can make sense because it is such a small field. I can figure out, okay, this is written by somebody situated in India. Like I almost know almost everybody in at least South Asian animal literary studies in North America, like grad students, faculty members. I know most of them. So when I get this article, I see some promising departure starting points that I'll say that a couple of months ago I was reviewing an essay and it was on Bengali fiction, and I read them as this was like this person wrote a paper on Bengali, mainly children's fiction, youth fiction, something like that. So I read them, those fictional texts, when I was young, and I never thought of them through the framework of animal studies. Now it is really heartening and like really encouraging to see that the people have started, which is, I think there is a whole like rich body of literature, cultural text is lying out there, right? So once we start exploring them, but I don't want to make a statement about these are, I can say that there are some encouraging signs. For example, when Renu said that this is a fantastic research, has fantastic research potential. Now, how they will be executed, how they will be done, I don't know. Primarily, I'll say, if I can be a bit candid here. And sorry, this is not a statement about anybody's scholarship. Perhaps I think this is the first generation coming, right, in India. So in most cases, advisors and like advisors, PhDs, guides, they themselves are not conversant with the field, a lot of them.
Yes.
So I see that particularly among like young, again, problematic term, young scholars, but younger than me scholars, let me say, like very interesting starting points, interesting ideas in some cases, but I just hope that there is like more universes gets created, a kind of discussion group or some kind of that where they can share each other's ideas and respond to each other's ideas. It also depends on, Anu, you know, that it also depends on the institutional affiliation, institutional location, who has access to what, who has access to books and journal, like current scholarship, all this stuff. So
Yeah. So we are actually trying to sort of make that happen to some extent, because that has been the experience of most of us, that we are in different departments where we're the only person who sort of is interested in this direction, and the others don't quite get what we are talking about, but they think that it's something not very serious. are not worthy of being pursued. And exactly when people start writing their PhDs, for example, they can't really find supervisors who worked in this field or are even particularly interested in the field. It's just that sometimes supervisors are allotted, so to speak, who can take on another student, and therefore that person then becomes your supervisor by default. And sort of feeling this gap, this absence of a platform where people could get together, bounce ideas off each other, get some kind of feedback from people who were reading something similar, and maybe would have something to contribute, is what made us then think of coming up with this collective. And we hope that it...
That is why, like, I'm not saying, that's what I'm saying. This is not a comment about any supervisor's scholarship. Like, this is a fairly new field. Like, I have been reading, of course, quite regularly and thinking about it for last 5, 6, 7 years. And I can honestly say I'm just starting now. Like, this is like 6, 7 years is nothing to think about certain issues. So supervisors, they haven't had the opportunity. They were not aware of this mode of thinking. So but anyways, there can be a collective effort to get tackled or whatever, deal
Absolutely.
with the situation.
Yeah, but it's also an exciting time because something new is starting. So that's really infused with energy, and it infuses us with energy. So thank you, Suvadip, for coming and joining us today, sparing the time right and early in the day for you. And
9 a.m.
I know, I'm very appreciative.
You made me wake up at 8 twice in less than 1 year, which is like alien hour for me.
Yeah. And so that's why I'm properly appreciative of what this really means. Thank you for sharing your time and your thoughts, and for taking all our questions so patiently and for responding to them. Thank you, everybody who's here. And I look forward to seeing you again at the next episode of our Table Talks. Have a great day or evening, depending on where you are. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.